Ας περάσουμε στο επόμενο μας θέμα, που είναι η εκδήλωση του Greece Solidarity Campaign Αλληλεγγύη. Την Παρασκευή 28 Σεπτεμβρίου πραγματοποιήθηκε στο Κυπριακό Κοινοτικό κέντρο στο Wood Green εκδήλωση από την Εκστρατεία Αλληλεγγύης προς την Ελλάδα σε συνεργασία με το παράρτημα ΑΚΕΛ Βρετανίας και το Συμβούλιο Συντεχνιών Haringey με θέμα η ελληνική τραγωδία, το αποκορύφωμα της οικονομικής κρίσης στην ευρωζώνη. Κεντρικός ομιλητής ήταν ο γραμματέας του ΑΚΕΛ Μεγάλης Βρετανίας, κ. Πάμπρος Χαραλάμπους, η κυρία Μαρίνα Πρεντούλη εκ μέρους του ΣΥΡΙΖΑ, ο κ. Paul Mackney, ο αντιπρόεδρος της Εκστρατείας Αλληλεγγύη προς την Ελλάδα και ο κ. Jeremy Corbyn, βουλευτής του Βόρειου Islington. Ας παρακολουθήσουμε τώρα αποσπάσματα από τις ομιλίες τους.
My name's Rachel Newton and I'm Secretary of the Greece Solidarity Campaign. The campaign called the meeting today with Haringey Trades Council and AKEL UK and also, as Isidore has said, we're kindly hosted here today by the Greek Cypriot community, the Greek Community Centre. We're here today to discuss the shocking situation unfolding in Greece now. I think to talk about what it means and also what we think should be done about it. We're really delighted today to have a number of speakers tonight who can talk about both the effect of the situation that it's having on the Greek people and also to talk about the alternatives to austerity and alternatives to the policies that are being imposed on them by what is an unpopular coalition, their own unpopular coalition, who has no mandate, and also by diktat from the IMF, the EU and the World Bank. So I won't say any more and introduce our first speaker, but just to say before then, after the speakers, there'll be time for you to contribute your own thoughts and also to ask any questions that you might have. So our first speaker today, I'm absolutely delighted, is Πάμπρος Χαραλάμπους, who's the General Secretary of the UK branch of AKEL. Please put your hands together and welcome Pámbros.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends of Greece, comrades, I would like to start by thanking you all for being here tonight and for your expression of solidarity as well as for your help to the struggling Greek people. Sadly, nothing much has changed since our last gathering, and Troika continues to put Greece through the failing experience of aggressive free market capitalism. Even though they are using the state finances as a pretext, their goal is not to nurse Greek finances back to their health, but rather they are trying to reset the Greek society, economy and politics back to the time where workers were disposable resource. Their hope is that if they succeed, they would use Greece as a blueprint to implement similar policies to the rest of Europe. 3 consecutive years of economic contraction, averaging 6% per annum and 25% unemployment rate should have been positive evidence enough that severe austerity and aggressive free market capitalism that is not just failing only the Greek people, but also Greece lenders by strangling the economy and reducing even further the ability of the state to pay off its debts. Quite the contrary, Troika is pressing the Greek government to impose even more measures taking primary aim at the minimum wage and social benefits. Is a worker making just over 500 euros a month really the structural problem of the Greek economy? If that worker can no longer afford to feed his or her family and to send his or her children to school, will the Greek economy miraculously find itself on a better footing? Of course not. And despite the rallying of free market economists around the coast, they have offered no real-world evidence that this is the case. We agree that both the Greek economy and the state's finances need to go to a sustainable footing. But we categorically disagree with Troika's measures because we believe that they are failing the Greek people. We support measures that will promote growth and we vote to protect the societies most vulnerable. We defiantly disagree that the pensioners, low-paid workers and the disabled are part of the problem, and we definitely disagree that pushing them more into poverty will solve the problem.
For inviting me. I'm going to talk a little bit about three different things, and I'm going to focus on what is changing these days. So first I want to talk a little bit about the economic trends that we see in the media these days. Then I want to talk about the series of proposals in relation to how we can reorganize the economy. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how Syriza itself is changing as a leftist organization. So it's the latest things that they are happening. So I was in a discussion a few days ago with economists, and they were saying that probably IMF role is changing a little bit from what they follow in the media, I mean. And what they meant by that is that, in a way, IMF is seen to be distancing occasionally itself from what is happening with the European Central Bank and so on. So why they were discussing that and what was happening with this? This had to do with the decision of the European Central Bank. The decision of the European Central Bank was to buy bonds of the member states, so the interest rates regarding the lending agreements will remain within logical levels, let's say. So European Bank is making this move, is buying the bonds of the member states, but the idea is that in exchange, these member states have to agree to all the memorandums. So the idea is that European Central Bank is looking as if it is supporting the member states, but there is an exchange for that. They will have to follow all the memorandum agreements. So it is, in this way, it is as if it's saying to the governments, move on with the agreements, make all these changes that Babos was talking about, destroy labor, destroy any employment agreements, any rights that we have so far. Do that fast. Don't worry, we are behind you. And if you have to worry about something, is the political danger. Now, within this process, the IMF looks as if it's changing as well. So instead of being directly connected with giving money to member states, it is taking a supervising role, a macroeconomic supervising role of the programs of all these member states. Still, what is at the bottom of all that is one thing, the destruction of the European social welfare model that we have and the destruction of labor across Europe. It's just that I wanted to give you an idea of different debates and how occasionally in the media the role of the IMF and the European Central Bank, it looks as if it's changing, but of course we will have to pay for that. Yeah. Now, what are the Syriza proposals? Syriza has very specific proposals in terms of how we are going to exit this crisis, and it has proposals that they are based on a just alternative economic system, that it will help us reorganize the society, which is collapsing in a certain way, production, and of course take care of the environment and environmental issues in Greece as well. Now, as you may know, the first step for Syriza is that we have to get rid of the memorandum, to nullify the memorandum, and renegotiate the lending agreements. They should be our starting point. And from there on, Syriza has certain aims. First of all is to create a shield where it will offer some social protection in order to avoid the humanitarian crisis that we have these days in Greece. The second aim is the reduction of unemployment. As you know, unemployment is very high in Greece. We are talking about a couple of million people. Third, safeguarding all social services, welfare state, especially health, education, which of course these days they are in a very bad shape in Greece.
Now, it's worth remembering here that we've only seen 20% of the cuts which the man who was kissing Angela Merkel just now, Cameron, has planned for us. If we want to see what the end result of the austerity process is, we need to look to what's going on in Greece, because as Bambos said, it's being used as a guinea pig, a test bed for a shock doctrine where ordinary people lose most of the gains that they've had since the Second World War. We went to Greece at the invitation of Glazos and Theodorakis after Tony Benn, who many of you may know as a former Labour minister and I suppose you could say national treasure, certainly on the left, issued an appeal for people who wanted to build a solidarity movement. We were both shocked and found it harrowing, but we were also inspired by the fact that there was resistance on a scale which would be unusual in this country, but which I think we can learn from. On the delegation, we learnt, and I'll give the up-to-date figures, that 23% of the population, then I think it was 20, are unemployed. That figure rises to 53% for youth. For young women, it's 60%, a whole generation being wasted. Greece basically being bled dry, the social fabric being pulled apart, large numbers of people beginning to leave, so many that our arrogant, Hellenophobic Prime Minister suggested he was going to break all the rules of the European Union and stop Greeks coming in to Britain, if you missed that in the summer. I'm pleased to say, though I'm not very fond of the current government in Greece, as you can guess, I'm pleased to say that when we were there in August, they had summoned the ambassador, the British ambassador, to explain Cameron's behaviour. I could go through all the other things. I'll just give a few points. Wages slashed often by up to a third, now moving towards a half. Some cases, the wages were cut retrospectively. The employers were saying, well, we should have cut your wages 2 months ago, so we're going to take it out over the next few months in addition to the other cuts we're doing. Any idea of overtime is more or less out the window. Large numbers of people owed back pay. Collective bargaining, which had been the basis of the regeneration of Greece post the kernels, and those agreements being abolished. The minimum wage reduced by 22% and for youth by 33%. The health service being smashed with people with chronic illnesses not able to get drugs. Pharmacies stopped giving prescriptions on credit because the state would no longer pay them for it. 60,000 small businesses, and Greece is a country of many small businesses, as I'm sure you know, going bust. Schools lacking chairs and books, and wherever you look, the railway service being taken apart, having bought, as I think Bambos alluded to, stock from Germany which didn't work. We're seeing in Greece something which was almost unheard of, a high level of suicides, including one person, Dimitris Christoulos, a 77-year-old pharmacist who shot himself in front of the parliament and left a note saying that he hoped young people would hang the government traitors just as the Italians had hanged Mussolini in 1945. Now, how is this being justified to us here? Because it's being done in our name by the European Union and the European Central Bank, if not the IMF, the so-called Troika. It's justified to us here with the suggestion, and you can see that these accusations can spill over to Greek Cypriots, not just Greeks, Italians, Portuguese, Spanish. There's a suggestion that somehow the Mediterranean lifestyle makes people fiscally indisciplined and financially incontinent, and that they're lazy, ouzo-swilling do-nothings and this lazy Greeks myth is very, very, very prevalent, for example, in Germany. If you looked at we went to Munich last December, I think it was, and there were some jokes along those lines. Actually, if you examine a little closer, you'll find that the Greeks work longer hours than Germans.
And the reason I wasn't able to go on the wider delegation was I had one of these awful choices to make about whether to stay here and vote in the British Parliament against some aspects of the welfare cuts or go to Greece and demonstrate against the welfare cuts. And I thought the responsible and right thing to do since I've been elected to the British Parliament was stay here and record my vote against the issues in the British Parliament and go on a separate occasion. And to be fair, the rest of the delegation fully understood that and there was no problem about it whatsoever. Could I just say, by way of starting, again, thank you for inviting me. Apologies for only coming now. I had to attend the funeral of an old friend in East London this afternoon. And it's nice to be in the Haringey Cypriot Centre. There are very friendly, familiar faces in the audience that remember the campaign to get the Haringey Cypriot Centre. And it nearly wasn't to be, then it nearly was, then it nearly wasn't, then it wasn't at all, and then it was, and it's here still. So what an achievement, and it was seen as an incredibly radical move at the time by Haringey to construct or provide community centres for different communities. It was seen by some as very divisive. I was told it was akin to apartheid, and a number of other completely ludicrous views were taken. I think the whole policies on all of that period and much later about community identity as part of a wider multicultural, multilingual, multi-faith community have been proved to be right and worked. And this centre has played a magnificent role in the public life of Haringey ever since it was opened. So I thank all those that have given so much time and effort to making sure this centre is successful. Thank you very much. This is a firestorm of the sale of public assets, but it's also an experiment in how we treat this period in European history. Think back to the Maastricht Treaty. The Maastricht Treaty, which I voted against in Parliament, brought in the idea that we needed a European Central Bank unaccountable to any national government, independent of national government, and appointed by the bankers to be the Bank of Europe. So the European Central Bank is not a public institution. It is very much a creature of the banking classes. Secondly, its duty was to maintain price stability across Europe. It has no obligation to maintain full employment, to maintain the welfare state, to maintain an environmentally sustainable society. It has none of those obligations. Its obligations are solely about maintaining the value of the euro and maintaining price stability. Very much old-fashioned 1930s orthodox economics. And that it becomes the political lesson which is being worked out now. So when you read any part of the various memoranda that have been signed by the last two Greek governments, all of them include within it restrictions on collective bargaining, restrictions on trade union activity, restrictions on welfare state, restrictions on all the rights that were won by the people of Greece after they had so brilliantly and bravely got rid of the colonels by popular demonstrations and political action.
Εδώ να σας αναφέρουμε πως ολόκληρες τις ομιλίες της παρουσίασης θα τις παρακολουθήσουμε προσεχώς από το Hellenic TV.